Problem number 3. A recent survey done by the Philippine Housing Authority found that 35% of the population owns their homes. In a random sample of 240 heads of households, 78 responded that they owned their homes. At the 1.01 level of significance, does that indicate a difference from the national proportion? First step is to identify the null and alternative hypotheses. We have the first statement as the factual statement, so that can be our basis in constructing the null and alternative hypotheses. Null hypothesis is population proportion is equal to 0.35 since 35% is the numerical value in the factual statement. And the alternative hypothesis is population proportion is not equal to 0.35 since there's no term synonymous to greater than or less than for the entire problem. And also in the question part of this problem, they are just looking for the difference. That's why we just use the not equal symbol. Second step, we identify the alpha level and the tail test. It is directly stated in the given problem that the alpha level or level of significance is 0.01. And for the tail test, since the mathematical symbol used in the alternative hypothesis is not equal symbol, therefore, two tail tests will be used. And Step since 3, the values given in this problem is in proportion, then automatically this problem is under C-test for proportion. The proportionality statement in this problem is random sample of 240 heads of household, 78 responded that they own their home. So from that we can conclude that this problem is under C-test for proportion. Step 4 is the computation. We must identify the given values first before we can solve. The sample proportion in this problem will be based on the second sentence in this problem. Now we have 240 heads of household and then 78 responded that they own their homes. So our X will be 78 and the total number of samples is 240. So for the sample proportion, we have 78 over 240. Just like what we did with the previous problem, we have to rewrite the fraction form into its decimal form so that we can solve easily. So 78 divided by 240, the answer is 0.33. Again, you have to round off to two decimal places. Next is the population proportion, which is equivalent to 0.35 in this problem. Next is the value for the Q with the formula 1 minus P. Substituting the value of P, we will have 1 minus 0.35. Simplifying, the value of Q is 0.65. Now that the values are complete, we can now substitute in the given formula for z-test of proportion. Substituting, we will have 0.33 minus 0.35 all over the square root of 0.35 multiplied by 0.65 all over 240. For 4-liner calculator, press fraction, then 0.33 minus 0.35, then move the cursor downwards, then square root symbol, and then fraction, then 0.35 times 0.65 all over 240, and then you press equal sign. That is the answer. Then for 2-liner calculators, you have to press open parentheses, then 0.33 minus 0.35, and then close parentheses, and then fraction, then open parentheses, square root symbol, and then another open parentheses, 0.35 times 0.65, close parentheses, fraction, and then 240, and then two close parentheses, then equal sign. That is the answer. Final answer for z computed is negative 0.65. Step 5 is the decision rule. Reject null hypothesis if the absolute value of z computed is greater than or equal to z tabular. We already know the z computed. Next is to get the value for the z tabular. And for us to get the values for the z tabular, we have to go back to our step 2 to identify the alpha level or level of significance and the number of tailed tests. So for this problem, we have the alpha level as 0.01 and we have two tailed tests. Meaning to say po, we have to draw an imaginary vertical line passing through 0.01 and an imaginary horizontal line passing through two tailed tests. And the intersection of the horizontal and the vertical line is the value for our z tabular. Substituting the values for z computed and z tabular, we'll have the decision rule as reject null hypothesis if the absolute value of negative 0.65 is greater than or equal to the absolute value of 2.58. Step 6, identify if we have to reject the null hypothesis or we fail to reject the null hypothesis. To find out if we have to reject the null hypothesis or we fail to reject the null hypothesis, we go back to the decision rule and check if the mathematical statement is true or false. So going back, we have the absolute value of negative 0.65 is greater than or equal to the absolute value of 2.58. So extracting the absolute values, we will have 6.65 is greater than or equal to 2.58, which is obviously false. That's why we failed to reject the null hypothesis. Next step and last step for this given problem is the conclusion. For the conclusion, since we failed to reject the null hypothesis, our basis will be the null hypothesis itself. And if we will go back to step 1, we have the null hypothesis as the population proportion is equivalent to 35%, which means 35% of the population owns their homes.